Hello, everyone. It's Martha Burgess Novak. I'm awfully glad to talk with you today. We're trying a different area, so we certainly hope that we are getting a feed that you can hear. Sometimes we have trouble with our speed up here where we are. Today's show is going to be about living in extremes. This show was inspired by a dear friend of mine and a client whom I love very much, who's very honest and certainly getting through a lot of her own stuff. And she made a statement to me I thought was important that implied that she was certainly living in extremes. You'll hear it in a minute. And I thought we'd talk all about that. Let's do a prayer to put us all on the same page, and we'll go on with our show, okay? Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, all everything is in this world, we really thank you so much for us being able to talk like this with like-minded friends and associates. And we now ask to see, hear, sense, and know what you would have us do as we open to the truth that lies in your enlightenment. We ask to know that we are all aspects of the living God, all the energy of that. We ask now that we see how we're being uncooperative with that energy, that we may live a life of peace. We ask now that we know nothing, that we relinquish needing to know anything with our brains, so that we may work with the aspect of God that we are our highest selves and hear what we need to do next in all love. We thank you so much and are grateful for all of this, and say this prayer in your name, in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, and in the name of each and every person here. You know, I really do consider this an all-denomination show. It's one of the reasons that I pray the way I do. Everyone is welcome here. We are trying to talk about God in the most complicated sometimes and esoteric ways. And I hope you enjoy the show. We also want to tell you that we not only have 2 books out there, one called The Life You Want, one called The Teacup Prophecies. We also are very proud that we've just had released recently an app called the Teacup Prophecies. It's for the iPhone only. You can get it at the the App Store, I think is the name of it, for iPhones, for 99 cents. It's quite a buy. So please do sign up for that. We'd love for you to have that. It is bits and pieces of very esoteric information that you can consult when you have a dilemma, when you just want to know how to meditate on something and live your life today. So we hope you enjoy it. All that can be found on my website, which is www.marthaburgessnovak.net. We are a .net, not a .com. So a client and I talked this week about how she was living in extremes. In other words, in her perception, and she made this exact statement to me, everything is wonderful, beautiful, and will fulfill her every need, or in her perception, everything is hostile, threatening, scary, dominating, aggressive, and violent. 2 extremes. There is little to no middle ground, and there is a lot more energy in the latter belief. I can certainly see this when she made the statement to me, and I think you all can hear it because there are a lot more adjectives to describe the fear-based state, this beautiful, than the beautiful state, all right? Of course, what I'm going to tell you is I feel like neither one of these statements are in her best interest. I think they are both fantasy. Life is just not all beautiful, wonderful, and will fulfill your every need, nor is life hostile, threatening, scary, dominating, aggressive, and violent. It's just not these extremes. Life is a wacky amalgam of everything, one big old whole. At its best, life is to be improvised and created. It is supposed to be learned from, and it's supposed to be something that constantly grows and that we evolve through. Another thing that this thinking reflects, something just opened that shouldn't have been opened, is her compartmentalization of life. And I think this is important. There's a compartmentalization of life. Now, this is what gets confusing about this world, is the duality. There are good compartmentalizations, use of being able to compartmentalize, and there are some that are less fortunate, which is what she's doing. But here's a good compartmentalization, just so we can make this very clear. If you are going to a big meeting and you're supposed to present something and you have an accident, a traffic accident, you have to take your upset and your anxiety and anything that, and anger possibly, whatever that car crash brought up, you have to put it aside to do your job well. That's a compartmentalization, and compartmentalizations are there inside of us so that we can be appropriate, right? But a compartmentalization that is not in your best interest comes directly from the ego child's mind. Compartmentalizing life into good and bad parcels instead of accepting it as a whole, and this only brings one, good and bad parcels, you see, because that's the way you're going to see life. So everything is going to be, this is good parcel, this is a bad parcel. And that's what she's doing in the ego child's mind. It doesn't bring in this kind of perception, the glory of the whole thing, right? Because this is just one big old glorious mishmash. Really it is. It's a wacky world. It's made up of things that hurt and things that are good for us. And many times the confusing thing is the thing that hurts is the thing that's good for us. So we have to accept the whole ultimately in ourselves, which helps us accept the whole in the world. We have to round up our energy and create the next great thing for your life and have you living as a full participant in this life. You're going to understand some of what I'm talking about right now when I explain it further, so stick with me. I'm going to repeat the line that she said. Everything is wonderful, beautiful, and will fulfill my every need, or everything is hostile, threatening, scary, dominating, aggressive, and violent. Another thing I want you to realize about this statement is that it is the negative that drives the positive, and by the way, it is the positive that also drives the negative. Now I want to talk about that because you can't have one without the other. Both these states are fantasy, and as you know from listening to this show, fantasy is its own reward. By that I mean that you just can't create from fantasy. Fantasy is not the same thing as having a vision or bringing a dream to fruition. Fantasy is a state of being whose purpose is to block reality and to block you from doing something, to keep you entertained and help you retain some modicum of self-respect when you're not self-respecting yourself at all, and to help you look like you're doing something when you're never going to do anything at all. That's what fantasy does. That's the purpose of fantasy. I'll give you an example. I had a marvelous actor a woman who wanted to be an actor, who came to me wanting to be this actor. And I gave her a script to read, and she read it. And what I do with all actors is then I give them notes. And as professional actors know, you assimilate the notes on the spot. You come back with those notes in place, and you get the next notes and everything. Well, the first time I gave her notes, she fell apart because being an actor to her was a fantasy. She didn't like the reality of having to get notes and do anything. You see? That's a fantasy. The whole purpose of this fantasy was to make her happy when she wasn't happy. But the problem is, fantasy is very damaging to have in one's life. It's the recourse, if you will, the recourse that children, to the child's mind way of thinking, have to yield the most reward. So the adult who grows up still fantasizing reaps the benefits of the child, which, by the way, aren't benefits at all. But to the child's mind, they are. And remember, you're two minds. You're the egoic child's mind. That's part of you that still thinks like a child. And you're the highest self mind that is in full cooperation with God as the authentic you. So the adult who grows up fantasizing reaps these benefits. Number one, they don't have to actually do anything and fail. Number two, they don't have to expose themselves to criticism. Number three, they can hide from life without looking like they're hiding. After all, they tell you and themselves that they're gearing up to do something, which they never do. Number four, this kind of fantasy feels good because it hits the opiate receptors of the brain. In other words, a positive fantasy, one that makes you feel good, affects you like heroin, and this is why it's so hard to break. You become addicted to fantasy. Every time you use it, it becomes more entrenched. And the problem with this is that then, after a lifetime of use, one cannot tell fantasy from reality. This is very difficult for people because one must embrace, oh my, this is my dog's toy that the cat is playing with, and it makes noise in the world. Let's see if it stops. And if they stop using it, otherwise I am going to have to leave this show and go get that damn toy. Okay. What I was going to say is it is very difficult for people who are addicted to fantasy to get out of it, because to get out of fantasy, one must embrace and make one's peace with reality, and finally be ready to shatter the fantasy and live in the real world. And they don't want to do it because it feels good. But it doesn't always feel good. Because the irony is, and I think most people that are not in my business don't realize that there is a dark side to fantasy too. And you can't have the positive without the negative. One propels the other, as I referred to earlier in the show. Let me explain, though, so we really understand this. One propels the other in this way. Every time you go into a positive fantasy, you are, hang on just a second, I want to make sure I have that up. Every time that you go into a positive fantasy, you are actually indulging in your insecurity and fear. We wear a mask in this state so people won't see the small, vulnerable person we believe that we are, who can't cut it in the world. It is not the authentic you. See, here's the problem. Your authentic you, stripped away of all the pretense we wear to mask our fear, is normal, secure, happy, and contributory. So every time you present your falseness, which, by the way, we're all capable of doing, You are proving to yourself that the world is indeed a scary place. Hostile, threatening, dominating, aggressive, and sometimes violent, as my friend said, by doing the very thing that saved us, we thought, when we were children. We are betraying our highest self, our true authenticity, what we are put on this earth to discover about ourselves and contribute from. You know, this is our potential. Our potential is in our authenticity, who we really are. And when we wear our falseness and we cloak ourselves in bravado, or in trying to be the wisest person in the room, or the prettiest person in the room, or the smartest person in the room, or the whatever we are trying to present, we are actually forcing ourselves to wear a face that says something falsely about us. Because we're afraid that we can't get to our real feelings, and we don't know what we feel because we're busy, how do I want to say this, being afraid or overcompensating. And there's nothing real about either one of those two states. Many people never get to this balanced, authentic place where they're just themselves, to explore this and to find out who they are there. We put on a second and opposite reaction to the fantasy of positivity and where everything is wonderful. We put on the opposite. We have to have the opposite because you don't have one without the other. So then, after this big display that is the false self, we go home and we are depressed, sad, lonely, jealous. And by the way, always, 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 always in this state, there is a sense of real futility. Well, why wouldn't there be? Where's the authenticity in this? And in this state, you plan to do it tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. This is your way of living, these extremes. So we, out of our anxiety, out of our fear, we put on this false self. And then we come home and we're something else indeed. So the thing that you may think saved you as a little one is actually taking you under now. Hi, hope. And when we have this second and opposite reaction, feeling depressed, lonely, sad, jealous, and futile, it feels so horrible, so dreadful, and so painful to face ourselves as the failure we are. By the way, only because you've never proved to yourself that you're not. That we are propelled into the fanciful state of everything being wonderful, beautiful, and that will fulfill our every need the next day. We feel so bad having been false that we have to get out of it, and the only way to get out of it is to be false again and give us our momentary fix of believing our fantasy. And then, dear ones, we wonder why we're not happy. We have a call. Shall we go to that? And then we'll come back and talk some more. Hi, I'm talking to a 917 exchange. Can you tell me who I'm talking to? Ah, I just lost her for some reason. Okay. We'll go on with our lesson. I want you to know I really understand why a child indulges in fantasy. First of all, children are naturally given to it, being that we are the imaginative little creatures that we are, you know? And it is a natural recourse for us to take when we don't know what to do with our emotions. I mean, given the world is so darn unexplainable to the child's undeveloped brain, we really don't know what to do with these feelings. In other words, you grow up enraged. You don't know what to do with your feelings, so you develop a false father, a fantasy father, a fantasy mother, a fantasy child, a fantasy family. Everything's just wonderful. That's one of the ways we can deal with it. But it isn't real. When I talk about the undeveloped brain when we're kids, we do not have the developed brain. I mean, after all, what would you do with this radio show when you were 6? You wouldn't even understand it. So fantasy, particularly if one or both parents were fantasists, is a more or less natural thing. It is a recourse for the child. What is not natural is for you to keep it as an adult. It separates you from the very reason one listens to this show, because you're trying to get closer to who you really are and your authenticity, right? And every time you use fantasy, positive or negative now, you're going to use both. Every single time you use it, it becomes what we call entrenched. You convince yourself by its use that you need to use it because it becomes a way of life. It gives you the momentary feel good at the expense of your feeling good every day throughout your life, because you have your self-respect. Self-respect goes right out the window when you are indulging in either of these two fantasies. Certainly the negative family has no self-respect at all, and the positive fantasy doesn't have any self-respect either because it's false. There is no self-respect in here, and we have to have that for a happy life. We have to know who we are, right? If one is living in the extremes, in the way we are describing right now, one is either terrified or overcompensating, as we said. This is no way to have a happy life, because there's only one way to be truly and sustainably happy, and that is to be authentically you and contribute your talents, gifts, and abilities out of it. So, if you're going between being terrified and overcompensating for it, where is the real you? You've never had a chance to know it, to unearth it, and to use it, to prove that all those things you didn't like about yourself are part of a wonderful whole that is God. In the egoic state, it is still God. And in the highest self state, it is all God. And we go from one to the other in deepening consciousness. Look, I understand that everybody is afraid. In spite of what people say and do that seems so bold, I'm going to tell you that everyone starts out in fear. Everybody starts out in fear. But we're all handling it in different ways. Now, I found consciousness studies and energy work the answer for me. Because it resolves the major things of the past. It encourages you to put your story down that you tell over and over and over again egoically. It encourages you to live in the present in a state of mindfulness. It focuses your energy in order for you to manifest and create beautifully. It fosters the flow state where there just isn't any struggle. And most importantly for me, it brings me, and I think if you will give it a chance, it will bring you closer to the God I really truly believe in. And this is a dimensional God of love. And I find this way of looking at the world, the esoteric journey, contains great peace. But there are things that stand in the way of our finding that kind of peace, that kind of authenticity, that kind of reality. And all of these things that I'm going to mention are part of the egoic mind state. Now keep in mind, for those of you that are listening to me, this is old news, but I think it's really important because to mention this almost every week. Because this is the thing that confuses everybody about God. You know, there are books that come out, why do bad things happen to good people and stuff like that. Well, it's a bit, with all due respect, the world is not divided between good and bad. That's the ego child's mind idea of life. You see, that compartmentalization. God's there in the good times and not there in the bad times. The truth is everything's God. That's the reason we argue about God. That's the reason some people don't see God, because God is everything. It's like a fish and asking a fish saying, how's the water? And they say, what water? I mean, you know, it's everywhere. Everything is God. The energy of God. So we have these two parts of us. We have the ego child's mind that is part of the ego, develops along with the ego at 18 months old. This is the fear-based part of us. Fear-based part of us thinks like a child, is self-focused and self-absorbed, selfish, jealous, futile, trying too hard or not trying at all. There's another aspect that we are of God, and that's the highest self. This is the love-based part of us that contains all the really good things that we want, awe and gratitude and peace and compassion for ourselves and everybody else, that has even a quality of unconditional love when we go far enough into consciousness and enlightenment. Forgiveness, genuine forgiveness, by the way. These are the two parts of us. This is all God. The other is still God. And our journey to consciousness is to go from the ego child's mind self into the highest self. And the way to do it is a triad. Awareness leads to consciousness, leads to enlightenment. All right. So here's some things that keep us stuck. One of the things is that we're all closet narcissists. Closet narcissists are a specific kind of narcissism, which doesn't look like we're narcissists necessarily, but we're going to have some traits of it. And we have that insecure underbelly. Okay? We have to learn first that we all are. It's so interesting because I can't help people that won't admit what they're doing. A great deal of my work is spending time to get people to accept the language we're going to use so we can call it what it is, so they can own it, so I can have it and get rid of it for them. And that way, then they can resolve this and they transcend whatever their limitations are. But if you won't admit you've got it, if you don't admit you've got it, you're avoiding it, you don't own it, and you can't get rid of it. Interesting, huh? Okay. We are closet narcissists, and we have to admit that, and we've got to learn to accept that we are, not judge, accept that we are, forgive ourselves, learn different ways of dealing with ourselves and all the things that scare us in the world. A lot of my work with people, as I said, is not just doing the energy work to change behavior, but showing people They have loads of different life-enhancing options beyond the narrow one that is given by the egoic child's mind. Narcissism, by the way, is such a way of life in our culture. You see it everywhere. And it's taken for granted as just the way to be. But it is an egoic child's mind state. This looking out for number one, being self-absorbed, selfish, self-focused. Nor is the answer here, by the way, to become sacrificial, because being sacrificial is also an issue. There's a middle ground where balance resides. Here in the middle ground, we look at ourselves because it is the right thing to do, and never ever at the expense of others. In the middle ground, we find a true altruism where one is cooperative, and whatever is on the table becomes about them and you. Both of you are creating an agreement to agree or disagree. I can't help people with their narcissism until we have a language for it. And many people want to avoid the parts of their personality that they don't accept, like not their narcissism, but their vulnerability. They have judged this as weak or something that they don't want. And I want to tell you that what vulnerability is in the highest state is a rapport with all life. Everyone's equally vulnerable, whether they look like it or not. So if you're avoiding it, how are you going to have rapport with who you want to have rapport with? So many people want to avoid the parts of their personality they don't accept. But this is no way to transcend these things. The only way to transcend them is to forgive them and embrace them. Only then can you choose to do or to be or to have something else. In other words, by your avoiding and denying what you don't like about yourself, you're putting these energies in a box, and they are unusable as anything but what they are, that you're avoiding. So there's a big chunk of your energy that you're avoiding using in life. And you might say now to me, but it's important that I avoid this because I'm judging this and blah, 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 blah. Okay, but let me tell you why it's very important not to avoid anything, but to face it. And for this, I'm going to give you an image that I often use and ask people to do. And that is, draw a horizontal line across the page. Okay, now draw a vertical line through that horizontal line. By the way, life is composed of many vertical lines. So, but we're going to, for our purposes in this exercise, we're only going to choose one. Okay, here's one. Now, let's say that horizontal line, for our purposes, is the dividing line between your egoic child's mind in the lower portion and the highest self in the highest portion. Remember, it's the division between the fear-based self and the love-based self, okay? Now, you can put any word down there that you'd like to avoid. Let's put it below that horizontal, the vertical line. Let's put anxiety. Why don't we use that one? Let's use anxiety. Now, what happens in certainly the work I do and in a lot of work that people do, whether they're using an image like this or not, you're kind of coming up in awareness. You're understanding all of why you had it, what you did, how it comes out, right? Coming up to that horizontal line. One day, with enough work and with enough resolving and looking at things in a bigger picture, etc., 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 you cross that line. So your anxiety becomes something else. It is the energy of anxiety that actually becomes peace, for example. That's what happened with me. My anxiety went into peace. Went into a knowledge of how things work that gave me great, great comfort. Yours might go into something else. You may want to choose another word down there in the ego child's mind that you're avoiding. That when you cross that line, it becomes something else. Now, here's my point. If it wasn't for the ego and the energy that you have distorted and made into anxiety and something fear-based, you could never get to the highest self. If you do not acknowledge that anxiety, if you didn't acknowledge and put your arms around everything that you are in that ego child's mind state, how are you going to have available the energy that so it becomes something else when you cross the line? You just never get to the line because you are avoiding this energy. That's why you can't put it in a box and put it up on the shelf, because it always remains what it is. But if you will get it out and use it and resolve it, it goes into something that's going to give your life meaning and make you happy ultimately. Isn't that amazing? So all these issues, all these things that we abhor about ourselves in the ego child's mind, are the energy of something incredibly valuable that you're going to one day understand and use in your life. It all changes into something else. This is God's system to get you to highest consciousness. Everybody starts in the ego child's mind and goes to a potential. It is inevitable. It is infallible, the system, and it is entirely predictable. But first, you have to get on the wagon. You know, I think of a silly joke. Remember this old joke that said, a man prays to God to win the lottery. And I don't remember the whole joke, but I remember God says, my son, you have to first buy a ticket. So even in this old joke, you see, one is fantasy, you can win without the ticket. And one is reality, that you have to take practical steps that God has put there for you to get where you want to go. And that's in reality, you see. Hi, Kat. Oh, I'm so glad to hear from you, my dear. Another thing that stands in our way, besides narcissism, is certainly a sister to narcissism, and that is our need to control. We are controlling because we think life is out of control. And that terrifies us. Maybe your early childhood home was out of control. That would do it for me. In fact, it did. Pardon me, I needed a sip of tea. When we are, hi Lisa, so glad to have you with us today too. When we are controlling, I can guarantee you we have not learned to make decisions for ourselves and be responsible for ourselves in the real world. And we've got to learn this. There are lessons to be learned about how to negotiate just about everything. And when these lessons are learned, one learns how to do business in one's life from the highest self. One learns to make better and more informed choices. And as you go through this and make yourself happy in the higher self arena, you will find you don't have to control yourself, your life, other people, and everything else. You will create, instead of seeking to stay in the energy of being the victim, being the child. The child's always the victim, by the way. You'll seek instead, as consciousness opens, to stay in the energy of the highest self, where you are cooperative with God. That's a wonderful word, cooperation. I do believe that. It means a melding of energies, you say. And one doesn't meld one's energy with God if one is entrenched in the ego child's mind. The ego child's mind is God. But to really work this marvelous system that you are to your benefit and to the things that you want, one must cooperate with the highest mind. And then, and only then, do things become easy and effortless. I was remembering a client of mine years ago that when he heard this, he started creating things quite beautifully. And he said to me at lunch one day, he said, I can't believe how shamelessly easy things are for me these days. And I said, well, that's wonderful that things are shameless. You know, sometimes people, when they start working this, are half-hearted in their attempt because they think they're being selfish if they got that note from their moms and dads. You know, selfishness is one of those things that you can put lower than a vertical line, and it's selfishness. And then if you go through that horizontal line, what it becomes in the highest self is the right thing to do. It's quite a different motivation. The thing you will create comes directly out of achieving the energy of the highest self, momentarily or as a permanent state of being. And to get there, there's only one approach I know. It's an odd approach, which is through the block itself, through the problem. In other words, you don't get healed by avoiding the problem. You get healed. I often use this image. I say, you have a dirty room. So what do? And most people will say, well, you open the door and you go in there with your dustpan and your broom and you clean it up. All right? But the avoidant person, the person that's avoiding who they really are, instead of going down there and addressing the dirt, closes the door and says, it doesn't exist. That doesn't work. I wish it did, kids, but it doesn't. I had a client one time that gave me this image I want to share with you. Well, the one that's coming up, not the one I've just given you. And by the way, I've given it to many people since. I think it's a really important image. In the egoic child's mind state, one approaches a wall, a block to going forward. And instead of figuring out how to go around it, or over it, or under it, now we're talking images, the person that is avoidant will paint a pretty picture on it, frame it as wonderful and beautiful, and walk back the way she came. I think that's a pretty powerful image. It's not going to get you anywhere. You can't draw a pretty picture on something that is a block. You have to be honest and face it and say, here's a block. I don't know how to get around it. Let's talk to somebody who has done consciousness work or knows how to deal with this, who's a business coach or a minister or a therapist, someone, because I don't have the knowledge in me. So what? We all can't know everything. Yeah, I don't know why I remember this. My dad worked for a couple of companies, and then he decided he wanted to be a CPA at home. And he had an office in our home, and there were just walls and walls and walls and walls of books. And he told me that I didn't have to go to school. This was when I was 7, right? I didn't have to go to school if I knew everything in those books. And so I got the first Encyclopedia Britannica down, and I started trying to learn what was in. I gave up after, as I recall, several paragraphs. I didn't get very far. So I reluctantly went back to school, and because I had no choice, actually enjoyed it. All right. Learn to enjoy it. I think that that's, going back to our subject, a really important thing. We control ourselves too much by painting pretty pictures on our problems and never really addressing anything. And you remember that the way to your highest self is through the problem, finding out how to deal with it in a bigger and better way, finding out your psychology, what you've done, and resolving it and saying, well, I certainly forgive that kid because there were not many recourses but that. But I sure can do something else now, and I will. Another thing that stands in our way of changing, which we need to learn is a good thing, not a bad thing, are our histrionics. By this I mean we create unnecessary drama in our lives. We are addicted to drama too, as an avoidance tactic, If we are pitiful enough, or angry enough, or hysterical enough, we have a nice smoke screen that helps us avoid the truth of what we're doing. We think we're hiding from other people too, but you know what? We're not. You know why? Because we're all afraid. So people that are afraid recognize fear. You're not hiding anything. And the people that have gotten through it recognize fear because they used to do it and indulge in it, right? Nobody's hiding anything from anybody else. We just think we are. What a shame. The irony is that for people who are highly and inappropriately emotional, and here's the irony, they are not feeling on the deepest levels where they could resolve something. No, they're not. They are avoiding this level and being hysterical on a surface level because they don't know that emotion is actually their friend. I'm sure, and certainly in my case years ago, it was about avoiding pain and my insecurity and what I thought about myself. You tell yourself at one point that you just can't experience any more pain from the past. And instead of understanding it and seeing the purpose of it and using your wisdom to make the world better, we often shut down around it and live in these extremes of avoidance, you see? So, to this point, I always recommend printing out an emotion sheet from the internet. Calling your emotions by name is the first step to doing something about this and being emotionally intelligent. If we just feel emotional and don't have a name for it, then that's going to go under the rug. We're not going to deal with it. And again, we've got to deal with these things. First step is to realize what you're feeling. Or, by the way, the assorted things you're feeling. You may feel several things at one time. That sheet is marvelous because you go, okay, I feel this, I feel this, I feel this, and I feel this. These are the things I'm feeling right now. You've got to teach yourself an emotional vocabulary before you can speak the language. We think that emotion is so scary, but I want to tell you what emotion really is. And I don't know what that was. But it's actually, emotion is just a signpost that tells us to look somewhere deeper, that there's something that is unsettling us, bothering us, bringing us, if you will, out of the peace of the highest self. Does that make sense? I don't know where that ball is, but it seems like every time I move here or there, that ball sounds. Okay. So we've got to realize that emotion is a signpost to say something's unsettling us. Look and find out what it is. And what we do instead is we're afraid to see the signpost. You get it? And the interesting thing is, once we really do look in a deeper place, once all the elements of that subject are resolved, there's no need for an emotional reaction anymore. There's no need to be hysterical. I say with all my heart, as someone who really does care about you, I say, find an energy worker. Find a therapist, find a minister, find somebody who ultimately knows about consciousness to help you. You can't do this yourself. I wish you could. I wish I could sit here and teach you how to do it yourself. The people that are doing that are generalists. And we can't get there being general. You are wired a specific way, egoically. And your ego is telling you, it's propagandizing that that's the reason you're alive, is these limitations that it helps you impose on yourself. In my opinion, that's just the way to make you unhappy. And that's why when we believe that ego propaganda, that's why we think life is futile. Because we don't see a way out. We believe in the ego child's mind, you see. In that mindset, we can't get you to balance or authenticity or the lovely life that really is out there for you. You wouldn't even be listening to a show like this if you didn't believe it was out there for you. One more thing. And this is a big thing. We've all got to make our peace and find our way to being ordinary. That's a word many of us react to. I don't want to be ordinary, I hear a lot of. I want to be special. And this is genuinely an egoic mind reaction. It belies the fact that you're already special as the unique and wonderful aspect of God you are. Don't you understand? Go more in that direction. In our egoic child's mind's zeal to be special, the ego child's mind interprets special differently than the highest self does, by the way. The ego child's mind interprets it as having more power and more money and more beauty and more creativity and being better than other people, or at least as good, winning approval from the people that haven't given us approval in the past, or, of course, they're like substitutes. The truth is, I think one of the most spiritual portals that we can have is the acceptance of being ordinary, and here's why. This whole journey from the ego child's mind to the highest self is esoteric. Things are not what they look like here, and I'm going to give you an example, because your only extraordinariness is in the acceptance of your ordinariness. Isn't that something? Just like joy can be in the deepest grief when you lose a dear friend, right? Just like that, extraordinariness is only in the acceptance of your ordinariness. One has to open consciousness to see, though, that you have always been special without effort, that you are the aspect of God you are. That's the thing that makes you special. That you are a unique combination of things, your background, your understanding, your level of consciousness, your talents, gifts, and abilities, latent or otherwise, by the way, and much, much more. You have to open to consciousness to see that you make yourself ready for bigger ideas and the larger plan that is revealed in the full cooperation with God, that's where contributions really come through. You must prepare yourself to be the aspect of the living God you are. This is where you're really special. And there's information there that it can only be delivered to the world by you. I have people coming to me and they say, I want to find my life work, and they've never done anything. And you just need to start working at something and let that evolve and go and see where you go, right? When I look at my own life, and it has been pretty miraculous. I started out as a child actor. I taught acting when I was in my 20s. I didn't realize my own energetic methodology was coming out of that. I was invited to be a business coach that very day, started a new business, Theater Techniques, with through, as applied to business. Years later, as my consciousness grew and everybody else's did too, I started being approached in business, and everybody was saying, you're talking about doing business from the soul. You're talking about doing business from God. I had never mentioned it. I just talked about energy. And now I do what I do, personally for people, professionally for businesses, on the radio, with articles in Hope's magazine. Hope Merrill is my darling friend, who is the editor-in-chief of the magazine Conscious Life Journal. You can find that, consciouslifejournal.com, on the internet, and it's a marvelous magazine you can subscribe to. One thing evolves out of the other. So if you don't move mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, how can anything evolve? The problem is our eco-child's mind tells us otherwise. You see, that eco-child's mind was there to help you understand your world as a child based on appearances so you would survive. That's not the purpose of anything anymore. You have survived, so the purpose is consciousness and enlightenment, is framing your life differently. It's going from the fear-based self to the love-based self. That's what you're supposed to do now as an adult with the adult mind. So now's your chance to prove that that small mind that served you so well as a child is archaic. It's a thing of the past. Just like the old sweaters you used to wear in 6th grade, you have outgrown it, but you're still trying to squeeze into it. And there's the problem. We have to realize we've outgrown it, give it away, and put something else on that fits. To do so, I say with all my heart, we've got to make our peace with being ordinary. I think that's a beautiful word. My ego used to react to that too. These days, it's a relief, and it has a lot of love in it. I'll be ordinary. Sure I will. I am. The extraordinary is in the ordinary, as we said. It's the only place you're going to find it. Here's an irony of the esoteric journey. You're going to find the thing you're most looking for in the thing you're most avoiding. You're going to find the thing you're most looking for in the thing you're most avoiding. Your extraordinariness, for example, is in your ordinariness. Your divinity is in your humanness. So there comes a time, I think we're here, where we need to start accepting ourselves and then making different choices from there. Because all sorts of different choices open in our acceptance of who we are. Don't avoid anything, dear hearts. Y'all are wonderful people. You wouldn't even listen to a show like this if you didn't know that. You just want to get the blocks out of the way. I'm certainly doing the best I can to tell you what they are and say, go on. Thank you so much for listening to this show today. That is where I'm going to stop. We'll be here next week at 10 a.m. on Sunday with another message of some sort. I'm awfully sorry we couldn't bring our person in who was the 917 exchange, and hopefully another time we will. The call-in feature has been working very well, so we hope that you will call in again. Ladies and gentlemen, I really do thank you for all of this. Please do follow us and share the program and any other programs that mean something to you. They're all archived, thank you, Kat, on Blog Talk Radio and Facebook Live. And you can send them around to your acquaintances and friends and family, by the way. And that means a lot to me because we're really trying to get the word around that we are here and we're doing this work. Don't forget, please, the books that are on our website, marthaburgessnovak.net. That's Novak, by the way, Burgess. And those things are available to you, along with some audio and various things, CDs, DVDs. If you want to know about business, I referred to this last week because several people mentioned to me that it's meant a lot to them. And that is the IT series, which is about how to do business in the world, how to be the highest self energetically. I think it's got a lot to say. All right, kids, let's do a prayer and get on with our life. Oh, aren't you sweet, Lisa? Thank you so much for saying that. She says, thank you for another great Sunday, a lot to think about. It means the world to me that you say that. Thank you. Okay, let's do a prayer. Dear God, who is all there is, you who are all we are, and all everything in this world is, we thank you so much. We're opening ourselves now to you, to what you have to tell us to do, motivate us to do it, to think different thoughts, to feel different feelings, to do different things, and to expand our idea of God as who we are, as the aspect of us. Please show us the difference in our daily lives between the ego child's mind thinking, which is always limiting and fear-based, and the highest self, which is loving and love-based. We would like to add our talents, gifts, and abilities to this world, latent or otherwise. And we open ourselves to do that now through the information that comes to us today. Whatever we're left with, help us move on it, dear God, that we may change our lives and be more in keeping with the ascended nature of our beings. Help us find balance. Help us come from the extremes to find the middle. Help us accept the privilege of being ordinary and the wisdom and the contributions that are in our extraordinariness without even trying. They're there. Help us be authentic and who we are as the ascended God we are. We thank you, though, for every issue we've had. They're all changing. They're all growing into something else. And we thank you with all our hearts for the whole system and the way it works. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. We say this prayer now in your name and in the name of the Ascended Masters, our love-centered guides and friends, in everyone's name. For the whole world works together in harmony, in cooperation, if not in harmony. They're different things, aren't they? Thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. God bless you. Have a great week. This is Martha Burgess Novak signing off, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.